I am thrilled to be introducing the first of this evening's readers, Mimi Schwartz. Mimi has published 5 books, including Thoughts from a Queen-Sized Bed, this one, which has the wonderful cover with feet on it, and Writing True, the Art and Craft of Creative Nonfiction. Her short work has been featured in the New York Times, Writer's Digest, the Philadelphia Inquirer magazine, Writer's Chronicle, and many, many more publications. Her new book, Good Neighbors, Bad Times, Echoes of My Father's German Village, is forthcoming in the spring. I've been lucky enough to read an advanced copy of this book, and it is wonderful. What I love about Mimi's work is its great humanity. In this day and age where everybody seems to be writing a memoir, O.J. Simpson's Why I Did It, and Britney Spears probably Future, the Year of My Great Disaster, or whatever she's going to call it. What makes Mimi's work stand out is her willingness to ask questions, to be open to the answers, to be quite simply human. Although her last and upcoming books are both personal voyages, they are at the same time so much more. They are the stories of the people who surround her. Her upcoming book, Good Neighbors, Bad Times, is an honest attempt to understand that which is most incomprehensible, the Holocaust. But in this book, she not only achieves a kind of understanding, but writes with a fierceness and a clarity and an empathetic voice. As the Virginia Quarterly Review wrote, this is a writer of great elegance and grace, and I am very pleased to introduce her, Mimi Schwartz.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was lovely. Suzanne wanted us to talk about if we had any qualms about writing our book. And for me, and I'm talking about now my new book, and for me the answer is a great big yes. I loved writing my last book, Thoughts from a Queen-Sized Bed, about my take on life in a long marriage. But this book, which is about my father's German village, was actually the last thing I thought I'd ever spend a year on, let alone 12 years writing. It's full of landmine topics for me, ones I've until now avoided in my life. One, writing as being Jewish, acknowledging anti-Semitism, talking with Germans about Nazi times, and even, though I still move away from calling myself that, being a child of Holocaust survivors because my parents did come here from Germany in 1937, fleeing Hitler. I was born in Queens, New York, 3 years later, the first Yankee in the family, everyone called me, and I wanted desperately to grow up being 100% American and past free. So whenever my father would talk about his little black forest village of 1,200 Christian and Jews and his good memories of growing up there 30 years before Hitler, I tuned out. He'd say, usually when my sister and I would fight or be selfish, in my village, we all got along. In my village, people shared and helped each other. And I'd think, baloney, and who cares? Even as an adult, I felt this way until one day I saw a Torah from the village in Israel and heard how it had been rescued on Kristallnacht by the Christians of the village, not the Jews, and how they had buried it for safety and later sent it to their former Jewish neighbors who had restarted their lives again in a little village near the Mediterranean Sea. And I thought, wow, who did that and why? And echoes of my father's stories came back. And like Jenna, who you'll hear later, I became interested in how people who were neither heroic, like Schindler, nor evil, behaved in terrible times. I probably still wouldn't have written this book if it weren't for 3 things. First, I started to tell the Torah story, and everyone was interested. They wanted to know more about this little village and its people. People were so used to hearing bad stories. They wanted to hear if there was a little good story, even a little good story, they wanted to know more. And I began wishing that I knew more and wished that my father was still alive to ask. Secondly, my mother, out of the blue, gave me an old folder of my father's that she found in the closet, and in it were 2 things that started me on my quest. The folder was full of German letters and documents, etc., which I couldn't read because I didn't read German, But tucked into the middle of that stuff was an article translated in English about his village and how, before Hitler, everyone, Christians and Jews, valued decency, charity, and getting along. The line that hooked me was, "Whoever might fall off a roof or get sick or have a death or a birth to deal with could rely on the neighbors to stoke the coal, heat the water, feed the chickens." And right after that article was a 3-page typewritten list of all the Jews of the village and where they lived now. There are no Jews in the village now, complete with addresses and phone numbers. Plus, there were the name of 2 Germans with addresses in the village. It was surreal to me, like a sign from my dad saying, "Get going, write this." And before I knew it, I started to make calls that led me, even as I resisted it, into my father's old world to find out about good neighbors in bad times and how they negotiated decency in those times. So the first piece I'll read is my first contact with the Jews on this list who lived in New York and who, it turned out, met annually to socialize and to see who needs help. These are people that as a child I avoided. So remember that coming here was a big deal for me. And inside me, I realized as I wrote, was still the child who was slightly afraid of this past. The other thing you need to know is that I've changed the name of the people and the village. In the book, it's called Benheim, to protect the privacy of the non-famous. And I struggled with this decision, especially about the village, and we can talk more about that in question and answer. But in the end, I followed my gut, and I decided to do that. But everything else that I'm writing about here is true as I experienced it. So this chapter is called At the Nachmittag. Today I am meeting the people who used to pinch my cheek and say, "Lieber Gott, how you have grown," as if I wasn't supposed to. Most were young, probably younger than I am now, but when I was a child at these Nachmittags, or afternoon gatherings, they seemed ancient and scary, speaking non-stop German. I hid whenever I could, despite my parents' urgings to smile and be nice. They've had hard lives. I crossed the George Washington Bridge from New Jersey, turn left, then right on 187th Street, and find them as instructed in the basement of the Mount Sinai Jewish Center in Washington Heights. It's an old stone building covered with half-successful attempts to erase you and Viva Zapata soaked into its stone pores. I can see from the store signs in Chinese, Arabic, and Spanish that the German butcher with the Glatt sign for kosher now shares this neighborhood, once the heart of German Jewish refugee culture, except for those who were anxious to assimilate, like my family, and headed for Queens 5 miles away, or to Great Neck if they had even more money. Down a dozen dark steps and through an even darker hall, I enter a room of 25 or so old people chatting away in German. Frail men and women with wispy hair, walkers and wheelchairs and canes, they sit around in a horseshoe table, sipping coffee out of styrofoam cups and eating thinly sliced pound cake from paper plates. More little plates of cake, neatly spaced a foot apart, encircle the room of an unbroken chain of tables pushed against the wall. Ah, those cakes. I remember such a wealth of them at the Nachmittag of my childhood. Linsertorte, Apfelkuchen, Pappseed strudel, macaroons, and marzipan torts, all full of wonders designed to make each baker shine and each belly bulge. These monthly events were held all over Washington Heights, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, but I only went to those at my Aunt Taya's house in Jamaica, Queens. Once a year, they'd invite all the Benheimers, often 75 showed up, for a day in the country, aka Queens, to sit in the backyard, look at trees, drink thick coffee, and eat a dozen cakes while schmoozing in German about everyone they all knew. I had skipped lunch today in anticipation of these rich home-baked cakes, cookies, and tarts, the best thing about Benheim as far as I was concerned, so these pale, store-bought slivers are a shock. They turn out to taste better than they look, but my first impulse is a vow to skip the calories. Before I left home, my husband advised me to bring pictures of my father and his house in Benheim so people would know who I am. Are you kidding? I said. They know everything about me before I step through the door. They've been on the phone for days talking about me. Driving here, I imagined the Lieber guts and pinches closing in immediately, but instead, everyone just looks up, stops talking, and stares. An energetic redhead somewhere in her 70s appears with a broad smile and a handshake. I'm Hetty Zimmer. We talked on the phone, she says. Welcome to our Nachmittag. I had gotten Hetty's name from someone on the Benheim list who told me when I called that if anyone could help me get information about Benheim, it was Hetty. Everyone here seems nearing 80 or older, and only Hetty in her emerald green suit looks robust and daring enough to re-enter the past with gusto, taking me along. The men all wear dark suits and ties. The women favor black or navy blue dresses, just as I remember from long ago. Hetty leads me to the center of the horseshoe and announces, "This is Mimi, Arthur Lermangart's daughter," and I hear oohs, see nods of recognition, and then the same broad grins I remember appear on faces that have both sharpened and blurred since I saw them last. Hetty moves me closer to the table. "You don't remember me," says a woman with a gray perm and owl glasses, her face as close as Tante Yetta's, the chief cheek pincher of long ago. She grabs my hand in pleasure. "I went to school with your Uncle Max, Gretel Dorfman, named Gould." Gretel is next to a stoop man who must be over 90 with a round face and the same balding head and big belly of my dad and uncles. "I used to brush the tail of your grandfather Reuben's horse," he smiles, touching my arm. "I'm your second cousin. My mother was a Schultzman. We live next to Tante Rosa." I nod, not knowing who Tante Rosa is, or anyone else named so far. I was never good at the genealogy game, glazing over whenever the litany began. Hetty pulls me away, pointing to a stern-looking woman with thin, feathery white hair. She is in a wheelchair. "Mrs. Weiss would like to say hello to you. You remember her and her husband Felix? He died last year?" Hetty immediately sees that I don't. "Her husband did the bookkeeping for your father when they first arrived." We walk over to meet Mrs. Weiss. "So, Mimela," she says. She holds out her hand, thin and blue-veined and full of tremor from Parkinson's disease. "And how is your gracious mother? You look just like her. Please send her my best." And now, in fact, I do remember her, especially her two kids with sad smiles, whom I was supposed to be extra nice to. Ellie, the son, tall and still sad-looking as a man, is standing next to his mother. I smile and say hello, feeling my mother's pressure to say more, and my old churlishness not to. 10 people later, I have been assured that I look just like my Aunt Keda. I am the image of my father, the replica of my mother, a definite Loengart. Then the meeting is called to order. The Nachmittag now meets only once a year. It is sponsored by the Benheim Benevolent Society, formed in New York in the 1940s to help Benheimers in distress. Ironically, no Benheimer has ever asked for money because, as Hetty puts it, these uneducated farmers somehow managed to make it in America on their own. They started as janitors, factory workers, nannies, full-of-brush men, and sausage salesmen door to door, and they sent their children to school to do better, and they did do better, more or less, but the society still collects money just in case. I have come today to ask for volunteers to talk to me about Benheim, what it was like growing up there, what friendships they had, what leaving was like, and what living in America was and is like. But before new business, that's me, Hetty, the group's secretary for years, reads last year's minutes and praises Mrs. Gideon, last year's treasurer. Everyone applauds. I get such a kick out of calling her Hetty, all these people who were always old Mr. and Mrs. X to me, but this lively, self-assured, older woman newly met is someone I could be friends with. She is Hetty, I am Mimi, part of the same adult world. Hetty, who is also treasurer, gives a rundown of how last year's funds were spent. $850 to UJA, $400 to maintain the cemetery in Benheim, $1,000 for the synagogue wing of Olei Tzion in Israel, and $200 for the Benheim Memorial Cedar Park Cemetery in New Jersey. Everyone applauds again. And then my turn comes. I tell them how my father always told me stories about Benheim, and I didn't write them down. Now I want to, and I need their help. I'd like to come to their houses to interview them. Why us? Talk to the Israelis. They were referring to the Benheimers, who founded a new village in Israel about the same time when this group came here. Yeah, they are the brave ones, the ones who are interesting, the pioneers. Nods of agreement while small conversations flare. I tell them I live in a town of Gentiles and Jews, not unlike Benheim, and that we all get along, the way my father said he used to with his neighbors. Now everyone is alert. I tell them I want to know how their Benheim life was like or not like my life in Princeton. Silence. Whatever you remember would be wonderful about school, family, holidays, funny or sad infant. I'm not looking for big stories. Kleine Geschichten, I say, dredging up my skimpy German to lighten the moment. I feel a stone wall behind their smiles, and I think, that's it, I flopped. But Hetty jumps in, announcing the names of those she has already arranged for me to meet in groups. The group leaders also prearrange. Give me their phone numbers. I am to call and set up a time and place, Hetty says. I will be going to Riverdale to interview her and Gretel Dorfman and Lottie Pressman. I will be going to Brooklyn to interview Mr. Marks and the Gilder sisters. She points to two half-familiar faces grinning on the other side of the horseshoe. I never thought of group meetings, assuming that one-on-one interviews would uncover more. But maybe collective memory is a good start. I return Hetty's smile. The meeting is over. 4 people offer me a little good cake from the bakery on 169th Street, which I take politely, only to have another eagerly offered as soon as I finish the first. The chocolate with the raspberry jam is not bad. There's a tug on my sleeve. My aunt was a good friend of your Tante Hilda and knew your father, too. He was a wonderful dancer, wonderful. Dancing in Benheim, my father's dancing? His stories were never about that. A little silver-haired woman hands me a paper with her name and address and phone number. I'd be happy to talk to you. Wonderful, I say, after years of indifference to old people. They moved so slowly while I whizzed by, so except for my mother and her sister, I never made time to talk. We'll make a date, I say, touching her arm, and I mean it. She smiles. I put on my coat and say my goodbyes, and hear a dozen, please come again, and bring your mother and sister next time. I can imagine I will, we will, even as I hear my mother and sister saying, Benheim is not their world. Walking back to the car, I pass a window of red chili peppers and garlic hanging in the Spanish bodega, and 24 bratwurst and salami hanging in the kosher butcher. The sidewalks are cracked, broken beer bottles line the curb, and the day is darkening. Few people are around, and I half listen for footsteps behind me, but I am not afraid, as if I already conquered something lurking in the alleys of my childhood. I start thinking about the greenness of Princeton, New Jersey, where I have lived for nearly 30 years, and the boat launching on Lake Carnegie, where I am supposed to be in an hour. One of our friends, whose family of ministers dates back to the Mayflower days, has built a 14-foot replica of a 1900 New England ship. He has invited friends and neighbors to see if the boat, to be called the replica, will sink or float after being christened with a non-polluting bottle made of sugar. Broken shards of sugar, broken glass here under my feet. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. I feel them coming together, but I don't yet know how. So that was my... So that was my first re-entering into my father's world from the perspective of the Jews who now live elsewhere. And I don't know how much time I have, but how are we doing?
About 5 or so.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do is start to read. I won't be able to go too far in. My first entry into going back to Germany, into the German side of the book. Because I think one of the things that I was trying to do in this book is, which I don't think is so typical, is to have both the German Jewish and the German Christian experience in the covers of the same book, all remembering the same time, the same shared life. So that what happens is that each chapter sort of both informs and challenges and moves the story forward, and you get, and I got, and I hope people will get too, a much richer sense of what, in fact, the history was, rather than when you're just hearing one person's tale. So anyway, so this is my first, I'll just get as far as I can get, and Suzanne, just cut me off, okay? He stands in front of the Hertz sign at the train station in Stuttgart, Germany, as we had arranged, and I recognize him right away from the picture he sent me. A boyish 25 with blonde hair and well-scrubbed cheeks, he is what I imagine as the perfect German poster boy of 60 years ago. He then would have been dressed in a uniform for the fatherland. Today he is in jeans and sneakers, carrying a knapsack and a pink print umbrella. Ralph is my translator. He is a graduate student in Holocaust Studies at the University of Mannheim, doing research about how such a thing could have happened in his country. Together we are going to Benheim, where no one speaks English. It's too small, too isolated, so my crash course from Berlitz won't get me through the interviews with Herr Adolf Stoller and whomever he's arranged for me to meet. Herr Stoller is the retired villager who does research on the Jewish cemetery, the one who sent photos of family gravestones to the Jews from my father's village now living in New York. A nice Gentile, a good contact, they all agreed. Ralph and I are expected this afternoon at 2 if my phone call from last night from Zurich was understood. I had written out pages of possible dialogue before calling and had gotten through my arrival time and that I was bringing a friend, Ralph. I was on a roll, I thought, until Herr Stoller said Erinnerung and kept repeating it as I shuffled through my yellow pad of prepared script, clueless. Erinnerung, Erinnerung, again and again. Ich verstehe nicht, entschuldigen, I said. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Ich verstehe nicht, Herr Stoller corrected me in a neutral voice and then dropped the unknown Erinnerung, thank God. He said he looked forward to meeting me, his low, even voice soothing my sense of error. Verstehe, the singular verb form, not the plural. I should know that. After I hung up, I looked up Erinnerung in my dictionary, memory, of all the words not to understand. For memory is why I have come, to find out if what the Jews of Benheim remember is true, that life was wonderful before Hitler, and that even under the Nazis, before they left, it was a better place than most. I want to meet whoever is left and decide for myself. Of course, I'm biased, having grown up in 1940s New York, where all Germans were called Nazis, not to be trusted, not one, and the old fears linger. But I would be happy to be wrong. In fact, I would love it. Decent people, even in one overlooked Schwarzwald village of 1,200, would be very comforting.
Everyone has friends. There's online friends, friends to go out with on a Saturday night, friends to hang out with and do nothing, friends who show up on moving day. And then there are the friends who'll be there if someone is dealing with a mental illness. Are you one of those friends?
It is with great pleasure that I also introduce Jenna Blum. Jenna Blum has been writing professionally for all you students in the room since she was 16 years old, when she won 17 Magazine's fiction contest, and she has not stopped publishing since. Her work has appeared in the Kenyon Review, Fault Line, the Bellingham Review, Glamour, Mademoiselle, the Indian, and I could keep going, but I won't. Jenna's debut novel, Those Who Save Us, came out in 2004, and it is quickly vaulting up the bestseller list. She's now number 22 for the New York Times bestseller list and number 8 on the Boston Globe's bestseller list. Sections for the book have have been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and I'm going to say this wrong, my apologies. She's also won the Ribolo
That's right.
Ribolo Prize for Excellence in Jewish-themed literature. Those Who Save Us is a searing novel that intertwines the stories of the Nazi past and the present as lived by a mother and daughter. Set partly during the Holocaust, it raises important issues of culpability and shame and asks the questions, who is guilty? And can guilt be shared? Considering these themes, one might expect a rather somber, slow book. However, as the book page review said, Jenna Blum certainly knows how to hook a reader in. Those Who Save Us is, I quote, a fast-paced page-turner of a book. And Booklist wrote, it is a gripping mystery. Family secrets, Nazi Germany, life and death decisions. These elements seem a recipe for a melodrama disaster. But in Jenna's masterful writing, they become a sophisticated and sensitive inquiry into cruelty and survival, and how surviving itself can have its own cruel fate. It's a great pleasure that I introduced Jenna Blum.
Thank you. I barely know how to follow such an introduction. I'm kind of like verklempt about that. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay. Thank you, Brookdale, for having me. Thanks to Suzanne for importing me. She is obviously a dynamo. I think her students and the college are very lucky to have her. And I'm so gratified that you guys have a Center for Holocaust Studies here. It is very important, especially at a time when other countries are cutting back on their Holocaust Studies programs. I am a good girl, and I always start out by saying additional thank yous to all of you for coming to hear me speak about this book. When you write a book, you do it in solitude because your characters seem real to you and you are obsessed with them and their stories. And when you are privileged enough to come into a room full of strangers who know the same people you do, it seems as though an act of miraculous telepathy has occurred. Suzanne was nice enough to mention Those Who Save Us having made the New York Times bestseller list. I mentioned this again, not just to do a little commercial for myself, but to say that it is really extraordinary because Those Who Save Us came out in paperback 2 years ago. It is a debut novel. It should have lasted as long as Radicchio. And so my agent, who's French, she calls me a lot all of a sudden. And she has a whole new voice for me that is like this, with this purr, this like round purr. And she said, all of my colleagues have been calling me asking, how did your author get her book on the bestseller list 2 years after it came out? You are like the biscuit. And once I translated this, I realized she was saying sea biscuit. So that's what people are calling me now. This book is like the horse that comes from behind. And what I told her was, this is like a really great testament, not necessarily to horse racing, but really gratifyingly to the power of the reader. I have a couple of book clubs here whom I've been communicating with on email. I started talking at book clubs 2 years ago, not to push the book up on any bestseller list, but just because, again, it's so great to be able to talk to readers, such a privilege. And they have been passing it from club to club, hand to hand, mother to daughter, sister to sister. And so it really is the power of the reader that is making the book have this groundswell of support. So I say this to thank all of you for reading the book, and to say to all the aspiring writers, if you write something that you believe in, and you give your readers something to believe in, I believe a book has a chance no matter what anybody says about it. So that's really, really important. Okay, enough of my little Oscars speech, or I'll start, thanking everybody, and my mom, who could be here. How many of you have read the novel? Okay, so those of you who have not, obviously have some homework to do. But so you know what I'm talking about this evening, I will give you the novel in a nutshell. I'm going to read to you the jacket cover of the hardcover, which I refer to as the Family and Friends edition, because that's who bought it. As is most hardcovers. Okay, so here goes. Anna Brandt is 18 years old in 1939. In her hometown of Weimar, Germany, where relationships between Germans and Jews are outlawed, Anna and the man she loves are committing the crime of race defilement. When Anna is forced to flee the home of her father, a Nazi sympathizer, she takes refuge in a bakery owned by a resistance member. Soon, Anna is making pastries for the officers of nearby Buchenwald, while also making special deliveries, risking death to bring bread to the camp's inmates. Then she is noticed by one of Buchenwald's highest-ranking officers, the Obersturmführer, and everything changes. Mimi will have to forgive my pronunciation of that, because I speak only ein bisschen German and very badly. Is that my mom calling? Are you at the event? You are? How is it? How's it going? No, it's great. I love to make people uncomfortable. I taught many years, so I know how to do that. Okay. So where we left off with Anna, she had just been noticed by this SS officer. 5 decades later, long after Anna has emigrated to Minnesota, she still refuses to speak of her wartime experiences. Anna's daughter, Trudy, has only one clue as to what they might have been: a family portrait featuring Anna, Trudy, and the Obersturmführer. Haunted by the guilt of her heritage, Trudy, now a professor of German history, begins a deeper investigation of the past, and not only finds a chance for redemption, but unearths the heartbreaking secret her mother has kept for over 50 years. That's my publisher wrote that part. So, now that you have some idea of what the book is about, I actually am not a good reader like Mimi. It's not my favorite thing to do. I like to do Q&A the best, but I will read to you a sliver from the middle of the book. It's actually the first thing I ever wrote when I sat down to write this novel. I did not start out saying it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I immediately jumped into the worst of times. This scene takes place, about a third of the way through the book. It's set in Weimar, Germany. And it takes place in 1942. The characters you will hear are Anna, her daughter Trudy, who's a toddler in this scene. There are references to a baker, Matilda, in whose bakery Anna has been working. And you will meet, as Anna and Trudy meet him, the Obersturmführer, who is a prince of a fellow, as you will hear. Some of you already know him, I hear. Yeah. He comes for Anna on the day of the baker's death in the late afternoon. This is always a quiet hour in the bakery, but now it seems abnormally so, as if the citizens of Weimar have sensed the danger and stayed home with their doors locked and blackout curtains drawn. It is so still, in fact, that Anna fancies she can hear the small noises of her eyes rolling in their wet beds as she looks this way and that, at the door and away. Her every instinct screams to grab her daughter, Trudy, from the pile of flour sacking at her feet and run. But surely the child will howl if so roughly awakened. And beyond the dooryard, of course, there is nowhere to go. So Anna forces herself to the door, on which somebody is again pounding so violently that the bell above it jingles. After she undoes the bolt, she retreats behind the counter, gripping her elbows in her hands in an attempt to hide their shaking. Maybe they will assume she is simply cold, a logical mistake. She has not stoked the oven since the morning, and even within the meter-thick bakery walls, her breath is visible. But when the officer enters, Anna's trembling stops. She is too terrified to move. His decorations proclaim him to be of high rank, an Obersturmführer, she thinks. And oddly, this Obersturmführer seems to be alone. At least Anna hears no commotion outside, no desultory talk or laughter from where his SS brethren would be lounging against a car, waiting, perhaps smoking. The Obersturmführer crosses the room. He is an enormous man, projecting an air of complete solidity except for a weakness of the jaw. His face disintegrates into his neck. He moves with purpose, but his gait is odd, almost mincing. Anna will later discover that this is because his feet are disproportionately small for his body, barely bigger than hers, sometimes causing him to trip over his own toes. He plants his gloved hands on the counter and leans forward. "Do you always lock the door in the afternoon, Fräulein?" he asks, hardly an astute business practice. Then he grins, as if he were any man flirting with a pretty girl, teasing her into giving him a free sweet from the display case. The expression transforms his face into one nearly handsome, the upward movement of his cheek muscles lifting the flesh from his doughy jawline. There's something wrong about it, however, that Anna can't put a finger on. She attempts a return smile. I was just about to close up, she says. I'm afraid we've sold out of nearly everything. This time of day, you know. But I haven't come for bread, says the Obersturmführer. Oh, of course, forgive me. For a special customer such as yourself, I'm sure I can find something more appealing. There's a Linsertorte in the back and some poppy seed cake, very fresh. The Obersturmführer examines Anna for a moment. At this close range, his eyes are like those of a sled dog, the pinprick pupils set in an absence of color ringed with black, and Anna feels them on her flushed cheeks like small, cold weights. Your business partner, freshed out. Anna twists her hands in her apron. My boss, you mean? She babbles. She's not here. She's delivering the afternoon orders. The Obersturmführer makes an impatient noise and strides behind the counter, passing close enough to Anna that she can smell the wind in the folds of his greatcoat, cold air promising more snow. He glances into the kitchen. She's been executed, he says. Executed, Anna gasps. She has been rehearsing this moment for hours, knowing how important it is to appear shocked, and now that it has arrived, she finds she hardly has to pretend. She braces herself against the display case, her breath materializing in white gusts. She is nearly panting. That can't be true, Herr Obersturmführer, begging your pardon, but you must have made a mistake. The Obersturmführer's gaze alights on Trudy, still sleeping in her pile of makeshift blankets. He bends for a closer look, bracing his hands on his knees. A pretty girl, he says. Yours? Please, Herr Obersturmführer, Frau Stout is a good woman, absolutely loyal. I haven't heard her say or do the slightest thing against the Partei since I've been working here. Why on earth should she have been executed? Why don't you tell me? The Obersturmführer says absently. Tell you? I'm sorry, I don't understand. He removes his gloves and places a finger on Trudy's cheek. The toddler stirs. How old is the child, he asks. 1, 1.5? 1 and 4 months, Anna whispers. The Obersturmführer nods. Then he stands and beams at Anna, who realizes why his grin seems ersatz. He waits a beat too long before delivering it, like a bad actor reminded to perform by a director's hissed cue from backstage. Now then, says the Obersturmführer, slapping his hands together as if about to tackle a difficult task. Let's not waste any more time, shall we? Why don't you tell me how long this has been going on? What, says Anna, I don't know what you mean. The Obersturmführer makes a moue of exaggerated surprise. You don't, he asks. Really? The tendons in Anna's neck creak as she tries to shake her head. You don't know, Fräulein, that your boss was feeding the prisoners in our correctional facility, leaving bread for politicals, asocials, murderers. No, I didn't. I suppose your ignorance also extends to the weapons we found in the bakery truck, beneath the bread. Weapons? Of all the... Where would Frau Stout get weapons? Why, I haven't the slightest idea, says the Obersturmführer, taking a step toward Anna. But you do, don't you, Fräulein? Just as you helped load the guns into the truck yourself. Just as you worked all night, every night, to make that extra bread. Come now, don't look at me that way. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you didn't know where it was going. I knew it was going to the camp, but Frau Stout told me it was for you, for the officers. She acted so proud, saying it was such an honor to supply you. Anna starts to cry. She lied to me, she says, weeping. The Obersturmführer watches her. Enough, he says. Anna continues to sob. She took advantage of me. She thought I was an idiot, she wails, spraying spittle. The Obersturmführer stalks to Anna and grabs her by the chin, forcing her to look up at him as though she were a naughty child. Then his thumb is in her mouth, calloused and tasting of cigarettes. Anna gags, her eyes tearing afresh. When he withdraws it, she tries to see his face, to gauge his intentions. The Obersturmführer is breathing hard through his nose. He clamps his hands to Anna's cheeks, kneading the skin, rolling his tongue in her mouth. Anna struggles free. Please, she says. The Obersturmführer raises an eyebrow. I don't want to wake the child, Anna whispers. I just forgot that I was supposed to tell you how I came to write this book in the first place. But maybe it's somewhat illuminating to have heard a snippet of it so you know what you're about to hear. I have actually a sort of a longish answer to this question that I will spare you, but I think that when somebody asks me, and it is the number one question, how did you come to write this novel? It sort of begs a longish answer because every novel is such a Herculean task, a constellation of memory and experience and instincts, that it really comes from a whole bunch of different places. I will tell you that I am of German and Jewish background. My father was Jewish, although non-practicing. My mother is part German. Both of them were born in this country, so it's not an autobiographical novel, and they were both not religious. But there is still a lot of me in this novel. I came to be interested in the Holocaust when I was a child from reading books about the Holocaust. I read obnoxiously early, and I began asking my dad questions like why the Nazis and the Gestapo were so mean to the Jews. And once he figured out that I was saying the Nazis and the Gestapo, he tried to answer my question. But he really could not give me a satisfactory answer. His answer was Jews were persecuted on account of their religion. But that didn't make sense to me. It was like saying people were persecuted because they all decided to wear orange pants. And I must say that after almost 3 decades of researching to write this novel, it still doesn't make emotional sense to me how the Holocaust could have happened. I explain it to myself best as a convergence of many bad things happening all at one time. The flip side of this coin is that my mom, when I was fresh out of college and knew everything, decided to knock me down a couple of pegs by taking me to Germany. And I was not happy about the prospect of going to Germany. As a half-Jewish girl, I was unable to forget that I would have been classified as a Mischling, a half-breed, and sent with my father to the camps. But my mom being my mom, don't argue with her, and so in short order we found ourselves in Germany, driving around the country, drinking little bottles of schnapps. So she was driving, so we needed to drink the schnapps. And we visited where her family came from, which is a little town called Walhausen. It's a farm community, much like the community in Minnesota that they later emigrated to, and upon which part of the book is based. And the whole time, after we saw Walhausen, we just drove around aimlessly, not having the intelligence like Mimi to have set up a schedule beforehand, or a translator for that matter, and neither of us spoke German. So what we did was ask each other over and over, how could the Holocaust have been engineered here? My mom is a concert pianist, specializing in Bach and Beethoven and Brahms. And she was trying to puzzle out how this country that had been responsible for generating so many composers, musicians, writers, and artists could also have engineered history's most atrocious mass genocide. So this conversation, as you can imagine, made us really popular at breakfast tables in Germany and at Bierstubes, where the regulars were having their drinks because people understood more English than we had anticipated. But nobody gave us an answer, not one that we could understand. And one day we were driving from Buchenwald, which was the first camp we visited. It was not memorialized at that time in '93. The Russians had just left. And so it consisted of a series of rectangles in the ground where the barracks had once stood, the crematorium and the crematorium fence. And I was struck by the fact that from Buchenwald you could see Weimar. So I reasoned, from Weimar, the city, you could probably see Buchenwald. And I thought, what was going through the minds of the German people who lived in Weimar? So my question to my mother as we drove from Buchenwald down through the beautiful hills and the gorgeous fields to the city was a little different. I said to her, what would you have done if you had lived here? I would not probably have had a chance to make any choices, but my mom would have been put in the same position that Anna, my heroine, is in the novel. As an Aryan, she would have had to make some pretty bad decisions about whether to be a good neighbor and to help her fellow neighbors, or would she have acted in her own self-interest. My mom's answer was to be quiet, which is kind of uncharacteristic, for a few minutes. And then she said to me, you know, I don't know. I like to think I would have been brave enough to help people. But if the penalty for helping people is death, and I had you kids to care for, I honestly don't know. I can only hope I would have been brave enough to help in some way, big or small. And that really spawned the character of Anna for me. I think of Anna as, her beauty notwithstanding, an ordinary German woman who gets caught in the great swinging door of circumstance. She's one little person who gets caught up in the giant machine that was the Nazi regime. So when I came home from that trip to Germany, I began researching the novel. I did do at least a decade's worth of concentrated research, which made me really fun. I read Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I read all the books I could find about the time period, watched documentaries, listened to German music. And I baked everything that appears in the novel because I thought it was important to feel my characters from the inside out. So I did make a lot of Linzertorte, poppy seed cake, strudel, spätzle, what have you. And there was a brief period of insanity that one of my kind readers called method research, in which I was dressing like my character Anna while I was writing her story, but only in the house. So that before I sat down to write at night, I would have like my little braids and my little dirndl skirt, and would sit down to write 10 at night, right through till like 4 in the morning, and then hopefully would remember to take this outfit off before I went to teach my students at Boston University the next day. The most important research I did was to interview Holocaust survivors, Jewish survivors, for Steven Spielberg's Survivors of the Shoah Foundation. I was privileged enough to do this for 4 years while I lived in Minnesota. I must have interviewed 60 survivors. I was young then and supposed to have a lot of energy, and so the foundation sent me to work interviewing couples. I'm not as young as I look. I'm now 37, and then I was like 23. So they were like, go, do lots of work. These couples had met each other overseas during the war in DP camps or in this country. The first thing that struck me was their generosity in admitting a total stranger into their homes and sharing with that stranger their most horrific memories. The second thing that struck me and that informed a lot of the writing of this novel was that many of them had not talked about their experiences for 50 years, not to their children, not to their grandchildren, and many of them not even to their spouses, although the spouses were survivors. So many readers ask me, what from your testimonies did you put into the novel? Obviously, you must have put them all in the novel. And my answer is, no, I put no testimony in the novel. Survivors' testimonies are earned at a cost the rest of us can only imagine. They are hallowed ground. But doing the interviews enabled me to create the emotional atmosphere that my characters live in, from guilt to shame to denial to a fierce and abiding kind of hope. And so I hope that in writing the book, one of my main reasons in doing so was to pay them an homage.
Impossible.
When you open a book, you can explore new lands, meet new friends, and discover new adventures. There are amazing possibilities when you open your mind to reading. You can log onto the Library of Congress website and let the journey begin.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle.
The odds of a child being in a Broadway show are 1 in 11,000. The odds of a child being diagnosed with autism? 1 in 166. The odds say it's time to listen. To learn the signs of autism, visit autismspeaks.org.
A book of a Holocaust survivor of 5 camps. And one of the things that's for the Holocaust Center, and one of the things that stunned me was how hard it was for Bill and his wife to write their experiences because of their children. They didn't even want them to know it. And I'm just curious about that whole family experience. When we deal with things at the Holocaust Center, it seems like people would want everyone to know about that. But in fact, Bill didn't want, he had huge trouble even starting to write it because he didn't want his children to know about it. It was just
Well, most of the Jews whose world I enter into are people who left Germany before the borders closed. So they are people who left in the 30s. Some of them did lose. The one thing is the younger people were able to get out. Their parents did not get out, and that was more. Those were the painful moments for a number of them. But I did interview one person, only 2 people in the village out of 89 who were deported survived the camps. And I did have a chapter on one of the people who did survive, and one of the surprises to me was how he too somehow was able to find the good in this nightmare of experience, both a combination of, weirdly enough, humor. You know, I'm feeling like I should be, you know, very, very serious, and he would spin things in a way. He would find the story of someone who was kind to him, even in the concentration camp, or how he was lucky enough to get this. And it really was interesting to me because I felt as if that was one of the ways that he survived, that he found that, I think if you don't allow yourself to find that goodness, you don't survive because it's so hard. And he would always have that story. So there wasn't an issue of children for them. I think a lot of the people who I interviewed were they were not older than about 20 during those times, because the really old people have already died. So I don't know if that helps you.
This question's for Jenna. Like being a writer in a creative writing class, and we have like other students and a teacher to critique us in workshops. How do you workshop your own writing?
The question, did you all hear the question? When you're in a workshop, you're lucky enough to have a good teacher and other writers to help guide you and workshop. How do I workshop my own writing? This is a great creative writing program. I mean, the students are very dedicated, and I could tell that over like my carrot cake at dinner. So, you know, that's really fabulous. I would have to bribe my students to come hear me talk. So. I workshop my own writing using the same tools that I use to workshop my colleagues' writing now. I teach for this school called Grub Street Writers in Boston. It's for adults who are trying to get novels published. And I've been working with the same novelists for about 3 years, watching their books grow from seedlings to trees, and now they're being shopped around. So everybody's in a really weird state of mind. But I am grateful to have taught throughout the writing of my book, because I would apply the same sort of rigorous criticism, rigorous but tactful for my students, and merely rigorous for myself, to my own work. I mean, if I'm looking at my work, I will say, this scene is not working, why is it not working? I'm not going to try and pass anything off on the reader that seems inauthentic, and that goes from character motivation down to sentence structure. I mean, I used to teach grammar. My students called me the grammar hag, and they did so for a good reason. I mean, I could spot a dangling modifier from like 5 blocks away, and if I saw it in my own work, I would be absolutely horrified and stomp on it. I think I'm probably a meaner critic of my own work than anybody else's, and that's because I want to catch the flaws before anybody else does. Because ironically, I'm actually very bad with criticism. My mom reads all my stuff before anybody else gets it, and if she says ho-hum about something, then I know it's not working. And yet I say, oh yeah, what do you know about it? You don't know anything. And this totally works, and it's necessary for the book because it's organic to the character. And she's like, well, I just thought it was boring. And then I'll be like, well, fine. And I just hang up on her, and then I go make the changes very quietly. And she puts up with this because she's my mom. You know, like not many other people are going to give me that much criticism. But luckily, I also have a very, very talented agent who has a master's in literature, and my editor, I trust. You know, she has godlike powers. So, and I have to take criticism from them, unfortunately. Yes.
Is there a particular reason why you didn't use quotation marks?
I don't use quotation marks in my novel, and the first time a reader asked me that, and I said, oh crap, I forgot to put in the quotation marks. And I was making a joke, but the reader didn't get it, and she was really worried that she had like scarred me. But in fact, it is an authorial choice, and it's an authorial conceit. And one of the first things I always told my students is, when you are doing something unusual with your prose, like not using quotation marks or not using punctuation or doing any of that funky, you know, Faulknerian stuff, you better have a dang good reason for doing that, because you're bound to alienate some readers, and an alienated reader is a confused reader who's going to put your book down and go watch TV. So why did I decide to make this decision for this novel? I didn't use quotation marks because I thought they looked too lively on the page. They looked like contemporary little firecrackers in a novel whose atmosphere I wanted to be sepia and austere and kind of glacial, because my characters are so haunted and so frozen by a time in history that they can't escape. So I was very lucky that my editor, because she has godlike powers, maintained my authorial conceit. My mom hated it, that the book did not have quotes, and the next book will have quotes because otherwise she will be really mad at me. Yes.
Tell me who the publisher of this book is?
Yes, my paperback publisher is Harvest, which is a division of Harcourt, and the hardcover came out from Harcourt. Harcourt, yes. And I think, their books are in the back, my book and Mimi's book, so definitely, of course, all of you should buy several copies, and we will sign all the copies, and you'll have all your holiday gifts. Yes?
My question is for Mimi.
Oh, good.
When you finished this book, obviously, very currently, the one that you
Right.
just finished, is your mom still around, and what does she think of what you've done?
She's not around, but she was around in the writing. Ironically, and I hinted at it in the chapter I read, she came from Stuttgart, which was a city. And this is a little village, what I wrote about, where my father's family came from, was in the boondocks. It was on the edge of the Black Forest. And she was not interested in this village. She kept on saying, it's not my world, I didn't come to it. And it's very much a kind of, I don't think it's in this country, but it feels very much like a German attitude. There's the city and there's these little villages, and so I think partly that was it. And I think the deeper reason is that she was someone who did not want to re-enter the past. And her way of surviving, which was different than the people that I actually talked to, was to not want to talk about it. So if ever I asked her a question, I would get a one-line answer. And if I asked a question again, I would get the same answer. So she clearly didn't want to go there. And whereas other people, the ones who I ended up really spending a lot of time with, were people who were willing to re-enter that period of history with its ups and downs, and so would take me along with them. But my mother was not one of them.